The wind had teeth that morning. Ravenshade lay wrapped in snow and silence, the kind that made sound itself feel unwelcome.
Come on, boy.
Officer Kyle Bennett stepped out of
boy.
the small brick police station, breath turning to frost in the bitter air. He pulled his coat tighter, scanning the pale streets, lit only by the weak glow of pre-dawn street lamps.
He's mine. Answers to Bravo.
That's when he saw it.
Patient is being treated.
Just past the edge of the lot,
Chip, file.
something dark staggered across the road and crumpled into the snow. He moved without thinking, boots crunching over ice. The shape resolved into a German shepherd, large, male, but gaunt beneath matted fur. Blood crusted along his flank, the tips of his ears blackened with frostbite. Kyle crouched, hands steady, eyes tracing the deep cuts along the dog's side. They weren't random injuries. These were deliberate, almost methodical. Whoever had done this knew where to hurt without killing outright. Then a flash, a faint metallic glint buried under tangled fur at the dog's shoulder. He brushed snow aside, catching sight of something small, almost embedded in the skin. Before he could get a better look, the shepherd's body went limp, breath shallow, head lolling into the snow. Kyle's training told him this wasn't a stray. The set of the dog's frame, the faint scars on his muzzle, the way his paws were worn in a pattern. This was a working animal, possibly law enforcement. But here in this forgotten mountain town, he glanced toward the street. No movement, just the snow drifting down, soft and deceptive. Every instinct told him to call animal control, just like the handbook said. But another part, the one that had driven him into the detective's bureau years ago, kept him kneeling in the snow beside the animal. The shepherd's breathing hitched, chest barely rising. Kyle's gloved hand rested on the dog's ribcage, feeling the faint, stubborn pulse beneath layers of injury and cold. His mind began fitting together possibilities. Hit by a car? Unlikely. Attacked by another animal? Not with wounds like these. This was human, intentional. Somewhere deep in his chest, a familiar tightness returned. The same knot he'd carried from Denver. The one case he couldn't close. The one that left a family shattered. And him transferring out here to a town most maps forgot. He hated that feeling. The reminder that he'd failed before, and yet... A low groan from the shepherd cut through his thoughts. Kyle leaned closer. "Hang on, boy," he muttered, not sure if it was for the dog or himself. He hooked his arms under the dog's body, surprised at how heavy he still was despite the thinness, and stood. Snow flurried against his face, the cold clawing at every seam of his uniform. The station door loomed behind him, but his truck was closer. Every step toward it felt heavier. Not from the weight, but from the pull of something bigger. A case he hadn't agreed to. A story that had started before he'd even seen it coming. By the time he settled the shepherd onto the passenger seat, the dog's eyes had closed completely. Kyle started the engine, heat blasting, tires crunching as he turned toward the only place in town that could help. Grace Harmon's veterinary clinic on the south edge of Ravenshade. The metallic glint in the fur stayed in his mind the whole drive. Not random, not meaningless. Something worth finding out. Snow blurred the road ahead, but the choice had already been made. Whether this was trouble or not, Kyle knew he'd just stepped into it. And deep down, he suspected the shepherd had too. Long before this frozen dawn, the clinic's front windows glowed faintly in the morning haze, a soft amber against the pale blue of the snow. Kyle didn't bother with the curb. He rolled the truck straight up to the door, hit the brakes, and swung out. The shepherd lay motionless on the seat, steam curling from his breath in slow, uneven pulses. He lifted the dog into his arms again, pushing through the glass door with his shoulder. the scent of antiseptic and hay. Grace Harmon treated both pets and the occasional farm animal, hit him instantly. Grace looked up from behind the counter, coffee mug halfway to her lips. "Kyle, what in the—" "No time," he said, already moving past her toward the treatment room. "He's freezing, bleeding. Won't make it if we wait for animal control." "You know Chief Hall's policy," she began, but he cut her off with a glance. "This isn't a stray." Grace's eyes darted to the dog, and that was enough. She followed him in, snapping on gloves, voice shifting to quick clinical commands. "Table 2, blanket. Let's get a warming pad under him. I need warm saline now." Her assistant, a quiet college kid named Jonah, scrambled to set up. Kyle stayed at the shepherd's head, steadying him as Grace worked. She shaved away matted fur from the worst wounds, the buzz of clippers revealing angry red slashes. The tips of the dog's ears crumbled slightly at her touch. Black frostbite. Grace frowned, leaning in. "These aren't from an accident. See the pattern? That's deliberate. Someone did this with control and purpose." "I saw something metallic under the fur earlier," Kyle said, "near the shoulder." Grace parted the fur there carefully. Her fingers paused. Not a collar tag. Not a bullet fragment. She reached for a magnifying light. "It's a brand. Small, deliberate. Whoever did this didn't just own him. They marked him." Kyle's jaw tightened. He'd seen branding in livestock, but on a dog? And not some crude etching. This was shaped, almost official looking. Grace cleaned the wound, lips pressed tight. This isn't something I've seen from police K9 units. Could be private sector, but..." She trailed off, eyes narrowing. Could be something worse. From the doorway came the sound of small footsteps. Lily, Grace's 8-year-old daughter, stood clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. Her hair was tangled from sleep, socks mismatched. She didn't speak, just stepped forward slowly, gaze fixed on the shepherd. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't—" Grace started, but Lily was already beside the table. The girl reached out, her small hand finding the dog's paw. Her touch was gentle, tentative. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the shepherd's tail gave the slightest twitch, barely there, but unmistakable. Grace froze. "Did you see that?" Kyle nodded, a strange tightness settling in his chest. In all his years handling animals at crime scenes, he knew trust didn't come easy, especially for one this wounded. "He's not giving up," Kyle said quietly. Grace straightened, pulling a blanket over the dog. "Then neither are we." The next hour was a blur of warming pads, fluids, and steady hands. Grace worked with the precision of someone who'd seen life balanced on a knife's edge before. Kyle stayed close, keeping the shepherd calm, murmuring low encouragements. By the time Grace stepped back, her gloves were streaked with antiseptic and blood, but her shoulders eased a fraction. "He's stable. Weak, but stable." Kyle exhaled, feeling the knot in his stomach loosen slightly. But the brand's image stayed in his mind, burned as sharply as it had into the shepherd's skin. Grace peeled off her gloves. "Kyle, this isn't just a rescue case. That brand. I think we might be looking at an illegal K9 operation. Private training facilities, black market transfers. Most people don't even realize they exist. And our chief's not going to want us poking into it," Kyle said. Grace met his gaze. "You've been here long enough to know that's true. But you also know someone has to." From the table, the shepherd let out a faint, low whine, not in pain, but almost as if in agreement. Kyle placed his hand gently on the dog's head. "All right, boy. You're safe for now." But in the back of his mind, he knew safety was temporary. Whoever had marked this dog might come looking. And if they did, they wouldn't be walking through the front door. Snow kept falling like a hush over Ravenshade, the kind that made the whole town feel padded and slow. Inside Grace Harmon's clinic, the world narrowed to the steady tick of a wall clock and the soft whoosh of a heat vent. The shepherd slept under a quilted blanket on a low mat by the window, an IV line taped neatly to his foreleg, a cone of warm light from the lamp holding the chill at bay. They called him Echo for now. Lily's whisper of a name, because he seemed to echo the movements in the room, not quite trusting, not quite gone. When he woke, he lay very still, eyes tracking the doorway first, then the corners, then back to the faces he was learning. He didn't lunge, he didn't flinch wildly, he measured. That was the first tell for Kyle, the kind you pick up on after enough scenes and enough animals who've learned to survive by reading a room faster than anyone else in it. Morning bled into afternoon in small chores that felt almost ceremonial. Grace changed bandages with calm patience. Jonah sanitized instruments and set out fresh towels. Kyle brewed coffee he didn't drink. Lily colored at the reception desk, sliding pages onto the floor so they could dry without smudges. Markers and mittens never got along. It took a day for Echo to accept sips of warmed broth from a stainless steel bowl, another for him to stand on all fours without wobbling. When he did, he placed himself between Lily and the door without seeming to mean to, shoulders angled, eyes slivered toward the glass. Later, when a delivery truck rattled over the clinic's icy parking lot, Echo rose, ears keyed to the sound of the parking brake, gaze cut to the threshold as if awaiting a cue. He stayed put only when Kyle stepped forward and planted himself there first. "Working dog," Kyle said quietly. Grace nodded. The way he watches hands, the way he listens for the latch. The brand remained a secret under gauze, but not from their thoughts. Grace had photographed it for documentation. Careful, clinical, no more than necessary. In town, you minded what you said about marks you didn't understand. That evening, when Lily's homework and cocoa had run their course, she shuffled over in wool socks and sat cross-legged beside Echo. She didn't pet him at first. She took out a tiny plastic comb and worked slowly at the fur around his intact ear, untangling, pausing whenever his breath hitched. She hummed a tune she'd learned in music class, the notes small, round. Echo breathed in, then out, a steadier rhythm. His tail tapped the mat once, then twice. "Hey," Kyle said, voice light, like he was talking to a skittish witness. "You're doing good, buddy." Grace set a folder on the counter and flicked on her office lamp. "I have a lead," she said, not looking up yet. "That brand, the curve at the top, the way the letters nest. It's not county, not state police. It's not military either." She turned the folder around. Inside, a printout of a trade show brochure, a grinning man in a polo shirt beside a German shepherd mid-leap. Private supplier out of the plains. They change names, franchises, partnerships, but the symbol stays. Kyle studied the print. Too clean, too proud of the product. "That ring any bells for law enforcement?" "Not the legit side," Grace said, "but on the margins. I've heard of outfits that are home dogs between agencies without paperwork. It's quicker, cheaper, and murkier." The clinic door chimed at that moment, just the wind tugging it, but it made Echo's ears prick and Lily's comb pause. Kyle stepped into the reception area and checked the lock anyway. He told himself it was routine. He told himself it had nothing to do with Denver. The old case could still show up uninvited, even up here. Failure had a long reach. He watched the snow drift across Main Street, The diner's neon sign buzzed to life, blue and hopeful. For a flicker, Kyle saw a different morning, a different door, and a family waiting on answers he had never delivered. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and returned to the warm pool of light where Grace and Lily were. "Guilt looks terrible on you," Grace said gently, reading him too easily. He tried for a deflection that didn't come. "It's not guilt, it's the thing that keeps you from letting this one go," she finished. He almost smiled. Something like that. They shifted into a silent truce with the evening. Grace handed him a ledger to distract his busy brain. He pretended to tally vaccine orders and instead memorized the flow of the clinic, the two squeaky tiles by the supply closet, the soft buzz in the fluorescent ballast, the slight hitch in Echo's breathing when the wind pressed the door. He logged it all like a case file, because somewhere under the blankets and bruise-colored sky, a case was waiting to be recognized. Near midnight, Echo stood again, steadier this time, and circled once before dropping his weight on the mat. Then he did something that made the room go very still. He leaned his shoulder into Kyle's boot, a quiet, deliberate press, not a plea, a statement. "I know where you are." "Buddy," Kyle breathed. Echo's eyes half closed. He let out a sound that was not a whine and not a growl, something in between, like the vestige of a word he didn't know how to say. Grace watched, the edges of her tiredness softening. "He's not drifting anymore," she said. "He's choosing." They dimmed the lights. Lily, already asleep on a folded blanket in the office doorway, stirred and murmured, then settled. Snow ticked against the windows like a quiet metronome. Sometime after 1, Kyle stepped into the back hall to take a call from Chief Mildred Hall. The conversation was short. "Animal control will pick up any stray left on our premises," the chief said, voice clipped, rules in place like fence posts. "He's not a stray," Kyle said. "Not your call." Kyle looked back toward the lamplight, where a dog with a branded shoulder had just decided to trust a room full of humans. He felt the old fear flare, of taking on more than he could hold, of opening a door he couldn't close. "We'll talk in the morning," he said, and hung up before he could think better of it. When he returned, Grace had pulled a binder from a high shelf, legal citations, veterinary ethics, rescue statutes. "We're not breaking laws by treating him," she said. "We're honoring them." "Animal control is still going to want custody," Kyle said. "For now," Grace replied, and her voice held an edge he hadn't heard in years of checkups and county fairs. "But I'm cataloging everything that matters. The wounds, the temperatures, the progression, the brand. If anyone asks, we're doing this by the book." Kyle crouched beside Echo and checked the tape on the IV, fingertips almost reverent. "By the book," he echoed. A gust pressed the front door. The heat kicked on. Lily's pencil rolled off the reception desk and tapped the floor. Echo's ears flicked once, then settled. "Listen," Grace said low. "The brand's not just a symbol. It's probably a batch mark. Dogs trained in groups, sold in lots. If I can confirm the source, we'll know who touched him last." "We, huh?" Kyle said. Grace held his gaze. "We." The clock ticked another minute into the quiet. Outside, Ravenshade slept. Inside, a battered shepherd mapped the room with his breath and chose a spot where he could watch the door without moving. It wasn't much. It was everything. Before the lights went out, Kyle whispered more to himself than to the dog. "We'll keep you safe." Echo's tail tapped once against the mat. Soft, a signal in low code. Then he stilled, the way trained dogs do when they're waiting for the next command, even if no one has said it aloud. The The snow had stopped sometime after midnight, but the cold that followed was sharper, cleaner. It bit through the seams of the clinic windows, making the glass hum faintly. Kyle had dozed off in the chair by the reception desk, boots planted, arms crossed, when the scrape of claws on tile snapped him awake. Echo was standing at the door to the treatment room, head low, tail still. His gaze was fixed on the frosted glass of the clinic's front entrance. "You hear something, boy?" Kyle whispered, easing to his feet. The shepherd didn't move toward him. He moved toward the back door instead, the one leading out to the alley behind the clinic. He stopped there, looking over his shoulder once, a deliberate check to see if Kyle was coming. Then, with a sharp, decisive push of his muzzle, he nosed the latch. Kyle hesitated for a heartbeat. Grace and Lily were asleep upstairs, but the dog's urgency carried a weight that felt like instinct more than chance. He grabbed his coat, clipped the leash to Echo's collar, and stepped out into the night. The alley was a sheet of ice under a dusting of powder. Moonlight bright enough to paint every drift in blue shadow. Echo moved quickly, but with purpose, his paws silent on the snow. They cut across the alley, past the trash bins, and up toward the ridge that rose behind Main Street. Halfway up the slope, Kyle saw it. Broken snow, churned in a way that suggested struggle. Echo stopped, nose to the ground, then bolted toward a stand of pines. Kyle followed, his breath pluming in the cold air, boots sinking past the ankle in the untouched drifts. They emerged into a small clearing. The moon threw silver across everything, enough to reveal the scene laid out like evidence in a crime photo. Blood-speckled snow, human footprints large and deep heading north, and alongside them, paw prints, bigger than a house pet's. Echo circled once, ears pivoting. Then he pulled toward the far edge of the clearing where a crude structure sagged against the tree line. A shelter built from warped pallets and patched tarps. The kind of place meant to keep out just enough wind to survive the night. Kyle approached slowly, hand hovering near the grip of his sidearm. The entrance flap was partly open, the tarp stiff with ice. He lifted it and crouched. Inside was a nest of torn fabric and old blankets, the kind scavenged from dumpsters. Food wrappers were scattered across the dirt floor, protein bar sleeves, the corner of a fast food bag. But what caught his eye first was the metal glint in the half-light, a rusted K9 unit tag, the lettering barely legible under the corrosion. He brushed it clean with his glove. Bravo 17. Kyle turned it over in his palm, the weight of it oddly heavy. A government-issued tag. No dog carried one unless they'd been part of a trained unit. And no legitimate unit abandoned gear like this in a frozen shack. Echo eased inside beside him, sniffing the tag once before settling his gaze on the far wall. Kyle followed his eyes to see a single nail hammered into the wood, holding what looked like a scrap of black nylon, a torn piece of a tactical harness. The air in the shelter was still, but the snow at the entrance told a different story. The prints were fresh, no more than a few hours old. Whoever had been here had left recently, maybe even before the snow stopped. Kyle stepped back out into the clearing, scanning the dark beyond the tree line. The silence felt heavier now, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you wonder what's moving just beyond your sight. Echo stood at the edge of the clearing, nose to the wind, his entire frame taut. His tail was down, not in fear, but in focus. He was listening. "All right, boy," Kyle murmured, clipping the leash again. "We've seen enough for tonight." But as they made their way back down toward town, Kyle kept glancing over his shoulder. The ridge was quiet. Too quiet. By the time they reached the clinic, the eastern sky was beginning to pale, a thin ribbon of light behind the mountains. Grace was standing at the back door, arms crossed against the cold. "You took him out?" she asked, voice low, almost disbelieving. "He took me out," Kyle corrected. "Found something you should see." He handed her the tag, her brow furrowed. "Bravo 17, that's not a local designation. Could be federal, could be contract work. Or could be whoever hurt him," Kyle said. Grace glanced at Echo, who stood quietly between them, as if waiting for the next move. "You think they were nearby?" Kyle looked back toward the ridge, where the moon had vanished behind cloud, and the first wind of morning was kicking up loose snow. "No," he said. "I know they were." And for the first time since arriving in Ravenshade, Kyle felt the old detective's edge flare sharp in his chest. Not the dull ache of regret, but the live current of a trail that hadn't gone cold yet. By mid-morning, the sky over Ravenshade had cleared to that washed-out blue that makes the mountains look carved and close. The clinic hummed with small routines, Grace sorting meds, Jonah mopping the hall, Lily drawing a lopsided snowman with a dog twice its size. Echo lay on his mat, bandages neat, eyes bright but guarded. When the bell over the front door chimed, his ears knifed up. He didn't bark. He went still. A man filled the doorway like a problem that had already decided it was the answer. Broad shoulders under a canvas jacket, winter stubble, eyes that flicked once around the room and didn't bother hiding the inventory he was taking. His boots squeaked on the mat. He smiled, the kind of smile that wanted you to believe it before you'd earned it. "Morning," he said, tone easy. "Heard you've got a German shepherd brought in from the road." Grace glanced at Kyle. Kyle felt the air change, subtle like barometric pressure dropping. "We're treating a dog, yes," Grace said. "Who are you?" "Name's Dixon Keller," the man replied, taking his time with the syllables. "He's mine." Echo's reaction was instantaneous and quiet, a freeze that ran from his shoulders down to his toes. He didn't lift his head. He lowered it, eyes sliding to the man's hands, then the door, then back to Kyle. A low sound hummed in his chest, not loud, but old. Kyle stepped forward, easy posture, cop-neutral voice. "You have paperwork, Mr. Keller." "Paperwork was in the truck that got towed last month," Keller said, smile tightening. "But he answers to Bravo, don't you, boy?" Echo didn't move. Lily's marker stilled in her hand. Grace shifted so she stood between Lily and the stranger without making a scene of it. "Vet records," Kyle said, still calm. "Vaccines, microchip number." Keller's shrug was loose, practiced. "We work rural. Dogs get what they need when they need it. Bravo wandered off in the storm. I've been looking." Kyle studied him the way he would a half-true story at a crime scene. Not the plot, too easy to dress up, but the grammar of it, the scuff pattern on Keller's boots, the faint ammonia tang in his jacket, the way his gaze cut to the back hall, as if he already knew the layout. "Where do you work?" Kyle asked. "Security, ranches sometimes, logistics sites sometimes." Keller tipped his chin toward the counter. "Look, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to take my dog." Grace's voice stayed even. "He's under medical care. No releases without proof of ownership." Keller's smile thinned away. "Proof gets tricky with a rescue. I trained him myself." "Then you won't mind telling me his chip number," Kyle said, letting the question hang. For a beat, the room was the sound of a heat vent and the faint tick of the wall clock. Keller's eyes chilled a degree, then thawed back to friendly. "I just told you. Lost the paperwork." "Then you won't mind if we verify through animal control," Grace added. "If he's yours, it'll match." Keller tapped the counter once with a knuckle, a little metronome of impatience. You all are making a simple pickup hard. Health and safety rules, Grace said. They're not optional. Echo pushed himself up, slow, deliberate, and set his body between Lily and the front of the room. Not a show, a decision. Keller watched the movement with something that wanted to be pride and landed closer to calculation. Kyle wrote a number on a sticky note and slid it over. Leave a number. We'll call when verification's in. Keller didn't look at the note. He looked at Kyle. You got a badge, officer. Kyle didn't bother to answer. The badge was at his belt. The room knew. Keller's gaze tipped. Acknowledgement, appraisal, a small adjustment of tactics. Finally, he scribbled a number and a name that matched the one he'd spoken. Don't take too long, he said, turning toward the door. He paused just long enough to trail a glance across the room again. The corners, the cameras, the half-open cabinet with labeled syringes. Then he left, the bell over the door chiming like an echo that didn't want to stop. They stood in the quiet he left behind. Lily exhaled a sound that was almost a whisper. Echo's tail brushed once against the mat and went still again. Grace met Kyle's eyes. Well, Kyle echoed, already moving. He stepped into the office, closed the door, and pulled the shade a third of the way. The town system was limited, but he still had contacts. Old colleagues who owed him favors. Databases he was allowed to check if he chose the right path through the rules. He typed Dixon Keller, added the number, added a rough description. Then he waited. The first return was thin. 2 addresses in the last 5 years, both rentals. A corporation registered and dissolved. Then a trail of traffic citations spaced far apart like waypoints. He dug deeper, called a friend who knew what to ask out loud and what to send by text. The texts came in staggered pings, prior involvement with unlicensed K9 sales, no convictions, 2 animal cruelty charges, dismissed. A federal inquiry opened, then mothballed, a note that felt like a smudge, sealed affidavits. Kyle stared at the screen, the knot behind his sternum tightening. Charges that disappear have a way of leaving the shape of themselves behind. Someone had pressed a thumb on a scale. He stepped back into the hall. Keller's not nobody, he said. Grace's jaw set, and he's not getting this dog. Footsteps sounded on the clinic stairs. Chief Mildred Hall, bundled, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes already measuring the distance between discretion and paperwork. Morning, she said. I hear there's a situation. Man came to collect a dog he can't prove he owns, Kyle said. We don't get in the middle of custody disputes, the chief replied. Animal control handles intake. Grace kept her tone professional. He's a patient. Legally, he's not leaving until he's medically cleared. Ethically, I'm not handing him to a stranger who makes him tremble. Chief Hall's gaze flicked to Echo, then to Lily, then back to Kyle. Bennett, I'll say this once. Don't turn a stray into a crusade. Echo lifted his head, eyes fixed on the door Keller had used. Kyle felt the live wire of a choice coil up again, same as Denver, same as every case where the path forked between safe and right. I'm running the plate, he said. Don't, the chief said. Not without cause. His cause walked in here and tried to take a branded dog, Kyle answered, and even he heard the edge in his voice. The chief weighed him for a long second. You do what you're going to do, she said finally. But remember, this isn't Denver. Paper trails here get people talking. She left. The door chimed again. Outside, Main Street moved like a postcard. Plows, coffee steam, the ghost of routine. Kyle peered through the front window and caught sight of a truck idling across the street. Dark paint, mud-crusted tires, no company logo, chains neatly coiled in the bed. The driver's face was turned away, but the profile line looked familiar. Keller didn't drive off. He lingered, as if patience were a kind of pressure. "Stall him if he comes back," Kyle told Grace. "Call me if anything changes." "Where are you going?" she asked. "To see what else Keller forgets to put on paper," he said. Echo stepped to him, leaned his shoulder against Kyle's leg the way he had the first night. A quiet pass of trust. Kyle rested a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the steady warmth under bandage and fur. "Watch over them," he murmured. The tail flicked once, like a nod. By the time Kyle reached his truck, a new text had landed from his friend, one line that sharpened everything. Keller's name had surfaced in a federal raid report 6 months back, then vanished. Same month a K-9 disappeared. Same state line. Same kind of quiet. Kyle looked at the mountains, bright and cold. He looked at the truck across the street, exhaust spooling into the air. And he let the old detective current flood back in, not the noise of ambition, but the clean, clarifying sense that a story had exposed its seam and was ready to be opened. Morning came gray and thin, the kind of light that makes everything feel like a photograph left too long in a window. Grace had already been at the clinic for an hour, coffee cooling beside a tray of precision tools. Echo for now, lay on his mat, breathing even, the new calm in him fragile but real. Kyle stood with his elbows on the counter, watching Grace assemble a magnifier, a micro-soldering wand, and a tiny clamp like a jeweler about to repair something that mattered more than its size suggested. "Chip reader still shows noise," Grace said, the words quiet, focused. "There's damage in the casing. I think I can pull the data anyway if I bypass the usual contacts." Kyle nodded. "Careful." She didn't look up. Always. Lily sat nearby with a book propped on her knees, pretending to read and actually watching the way Grace's fingers moved. Steady, sure. Echo tracked that movement too, a faint lift of his ears when the wand hummed, a slow blink when Grace paused. "All right," she murmured. "Let's see who you are." Grace opened a clean line in the chip's epoxy, touched the contacts, and waited while her tablet tried again. Static on a screen, a heartbeat of nothing. Then a cascade of characters shivered into place, fragmented, then resolving. A name surfaced first, and the room changed. "K-9 Axel," Grace read, breath catching just enough to hear it. "Handler, Sergeant Noah Rayburn. Agency designation, Federal Task Force. Status, missing. 6 months." Lily's book slid closed without a sound. Kyle felt the hairs at the back of his neck rise, the way they do when a hunch stands up and starts walking. "Axel," he said, testing the shape of it. The shepherd's ear flicked toward him, a small acknowledgement, like the name had weight in the room that he recognized. Grace scrolled, scanning the metadata. "Incident location, Eastern Plains, cold storage facility, sealed report numbers, last check-in." Then nothing. Kyle stared at the screen. A federal task force, a missing K-9, a dog branded like equipment, pieces that didn't like each other but still aligned. "Noah Rayburn," he said. "I know the name. Retired last year, not local." "I can pull a mailing address," Grace said, "but you'll get more if you show up than if you call." He was already grabbing his jacket. "I'll be back." Grace glanced at Lily, then at Echo. "We'll be okay." Echo lifted his head, as if echoing the promise. Kyle crouched, letting the dog nose his knuckles. "Axel," he said softly. The tail tapped once. It felt like permission. The road out of Ravenshade unspooled in a ribbon of cleared asphalt between white banks of snow. Kyle took the canyon down, then the frontage road that ran straight as a rule toward the plains. The town fell away in the rear view, mountains shrinking into a postcard, the sky widening until it felt almost too big. Noah Rayburn lived in a one-story house with a stubborn porch and a flag that had weathered more than one winter. A pair of work boots sat neatly by the door. Kyle knocked once, twice. He heard the slow shuffle of someone who took time because time had always been there. Until it wasn't. The door opened on a man with gray in his beard, and the kind of eyes that gather rooms before they speak. He took in the badge, the stance, the not-quite-city coat. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Sergeant Rayburn," Kyle said. "Name's Bennett. I'm from Ravenshade. I need to ask about a dog." Rayburn's jaw worked once, a muscle flicker at the hinge. "We're done with dogs here," he said. But it didn't sound like refusal. It sounded like grief shaped into a rule he kept to stay upright. "This one answers to Axel," Kyle said. The name carried. Rayburn's hand tightened on the doorframe, then released. He stepped back. "All right," he said. "Come in." The living room was simple. Family photos, a coffee table with worn edges, a framed commendation that had been dusted but not celebrated. Kyle stayed near the entry until invited farther. Rayburn gestured to the couch, remained standing himself, as if the story he was about to tell needed the extra lift of his spine. "We were running a joint operation," he began. "Cold storage site off the interstate. A lot of comings and goings, nothing on paper. We'd developed a lead that tied the place to illegal transfers. Animals, yes. But not just that. Sensitive goods. Things you can stash between pallets and never scan." Axel, Kyle thought. Keller, he didn't say. "Axel was point," Rayburn continued. "Good nose. Better instinct. We trained clear alerts. No barking, no braking. Just the lean, the look. He marked 3 trailers in a row. Then he froze at a 4th. Rayburn paused, eyes focused somewhere beyond the wall. "I gave the hold command. 10 seconds later, the power cut. Total dark. Radios chirped once and died. The doors to the bay locked from the outside. He inhaled, a slow pull like the air was heavy. Somebody compromised us. Files went missing after. Reports got redacted clear down to the bones. Official line said equipment failure and logistical mistake. Unofficial line was, forget it. Move on." "Axel," Kyle said. "Gone in the chaos," Rayburn replied. "We found blood sign in the drift by the service exit the next morning. Not his, I told myself. Not his, but I didn't have proof. He wasn't chipped to our database. Federal contracted dogs go through different vendors. Paperwork turns into smoke when you try to put hands on it." Kyle let the quiet sit. "We found him," he said. "Ravenshade. He made it to town and collapsed outside our station. He's hurt, but he's alive." Rayburn closed his eyes, and the lines at his temples deepened. When he opened them, there was something raw there that hadn't been allowed out in 6 months. "He was a good dog," he said, voice low. "A better partner than I deserved." "Someone tried to claim him," Kyle added. "Name's Dixon Keller." Rayburn's head tipped. Not a nod, not a shake. Recognition without consent. "Keller floated around the edges," he said. "Private trainer doing contract work, nobody wanted to sign an ink. I flagged it. A supervisor told me the market was flexible." His mouth twisted. "We lost more than power that night. We lost pages. Files were destroyed," Kyle said. "You think Keller was in on it?" "I think Keller knows who turns the lights off," Rayburn answered. And I think anyone who can brand a dog and sleep after has friends who make things go quiet. He crossed to a cabinet, pulled a small box from the back of a shelf, and set it on the table. Inside lay a worn patch, Axel stitched in block letters, and a photo. Rayburn kneeling beside a younger, unscarred version of the dog, sleeping now under a clinic lamp miles away. Axel's gaze in the picture was the same as Echo's when he watched the door, focused, ready, steady. "Take the patch," Rayburn said. "If he remembers anything by smell, it'll be this. And tell him I never stopped looking." Kyle swallowed. "You should come up," he said. "See him yourself." Rayburn's mouth tightened, then softened. "I will," he said. "But you need to know what you're walking into first. If Keller had his hands on Axel, then Keller's not just a thief, he's a hinge. Doors swing on men like that, and the ones on the other side don't like being seen." Outside, wind moved through the bare branches with a sound like paper being turned. Kyle stood, the box's small weight in his hands. "I can't let this go," he said. Rayburn studied him, reading all the things Kyle didn't say. The transfer, the case that had broken more than it solved, the mountain town that was supposed to be quiet. "Then don't," Rayburn said. "But don't do it alone." The drive back ran along the same straight road, but everything felt tilted, as if the map had shifted under the tires. Ravenshade's sign appeared, then the familiar curve past the diner. At the clinic, the bell chimed once, warm air spilling into the foyer. Grace looked up, hopeful question already in her eyes. Kyle set the patch on the counter, then the printout with the name. "K9 Axel," he said. "Handler Noah Rayburn. Missing since the raid 6 months ago." Grace exhaled, a sound that let go of disbelief and grabbed hold of purpose. "Then Axel's not just a survivor," she said. "He's a witness." "Which means Keller's more than a nuisance," Kyle added. "If he had Axel, he knows what was destroyed. He knows who wanted it gone." They both glanced toward the mat. Axel slept, ears twitching at the turn of a page in Lily's book. Kyle crouched again, holding the patch out. Axel's nose twitched, then pressed into the cloth with a soft, unmistakable huff. His tail thumped once, twice. He opened his eyes and looked at the door. Rising stakes didn't change the room's small rituals. The IV check, the water bowl refreshed, the lamp adjusted so warmth pooled where it should. But the air felt different now, charged with the knowledge that this wasn't just about keeping a dog safe. It was about bringing light to a place that had been designed to stay dark. Kyle straightened, met Grace's gaze. "We move fast," he said, "before Keller does." Grace nodded, already reaching for a clean folder, already labeling it with a name that finally fit. "Axel," she wrote, neat letters on a tab. "File 1. By late afternoon, the light went green-blue, the storm building itself like a wall. Main Street emptied early, plows blinking slow and patient, the diner's neon humming behind fogged glass. Grace closed the clinic an hour before sunset, drew the blinds, and set an extra bowl of water near the heater. The forecast called it a winter event. In Ravenshade, that meant you prepared for a night that tested locks and nerves. Axel, now without hesitation, paced once from window to door and back, restless in a way that wasn't pain. The pressure was dropping. He felt it. So did Kyle, who checked the back entrance twice, then a third time, because habit was the only thing that settled the leftover edges in his chest. "Dinner, then lights low," Grace said. "We ride it out." Lily stacked her pencils, lined them like little fence posts. "Can Axel sleep in the office tonight?" "Yeah," Kyle said, "where he can hear both doors." They ate simple, soup, bread, the kind of food that gathers a room around one temperature. Wind pressed the windows like a visitor who didn't like being kept outside. Sleet began, ticking, then hissing. The snow followed, heavy and wet at first, then smaller, sharper. A curtain that erased the streetlight poles one by one. Power flickered once, twice. Came back. The heat kicked harder. By 8, Lily had drifted off under a fleece throw on the office couch. Grace tucked the blanket tighter around her and rubbed a thumb over a bruise yellowing at the base of Axel's ear, gentling the fur there. "We're almost through the worst," she said. The third flicker didn't turn the lights back on. The clinic slid into a dim that felt like water. The generator coughed, caught, sent a thin braid of power to the exam lamp and the back hall. Outside, the storm grew its own voice, white noise with a will. "Flashlights," Kyle said, already moving. He passed one to Grace, one to Jonah, clipped the third to his own jacket. He set the radio on the counter, cranked it until static gave way to a local announcer counting road closures. Axel rose, body align, ears cutting toward the front. He didn't bark. He positioned himself between the office door and the foyer, eyes on the glass. "Wind," Grace said, but it was the kind of reassurances you offer out loud so your hands remember what to do. The front door rattled in its frame. Once, then subtly again, not in time with the gusts. Kyle angled his light. No silhouette, no shadow. Just snow plastered to the glass, and the bell at the top trembling without sound. He moved to the door, set his palm flat to feel the shake, then glanced back at Grace. "Deadbolt's good." Axel pressed forward a step, head low. He swung toward the back hall in the same smooth motion, like the air had issued 2 instructions at once. "Stay with Lily," Grace told Jonah, who nodded and slipped into the office. The back door had a barrel bolt in addition to the knob lock. Kyle checked both. He listened. Snow on the roof, the heater cycling, the slow exhale of the building settling into cold. Then a small sound. Metal on metal, soft, deliberate. Not the door, the latch to the alley gate. "Someone's outside," Kyle said, voice down to the floorboards. Axel's answer was a low, contained whine, the kind that vibrates in the bones. He looked at Kyle, then at the dark square of the window over the sink, where a gust had blown a coin of frost away from the glass. A figure moved in that frosted frame, close then gone. Kyle's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text that shouldn't have been able to get through this weather found a path anyway. Unknown number. One line. "You're not the only one who knows how to follow tracks." He didn't show it to Grace. He didn't need to. She'd read it on his face. The next moments folded quickly, a thud from the office. Jonah's shout, short, cut off. Grace lunged toward the hall. Kyle grabbed her arm, released it when he realized she was faster to Lily than he was. Axel shot past them both, a streak of disciplined muscle and memory. The office door stood ajar, the generator light throwing a weak cone across the floor. The window above the couch hung open half a foot. Who had cracked it earlier to bleed off the radiator? And now it breathed in snow like a second set of lungs. The curtain snapped once in the gust, then settled. Lily's blanket lay empty on the cushions. Jonah was on the floor, conscious but dazed, a smear of dust on his cheek where he'd slid into the desk. Grace knelt, hands moving over his shoulders, his pupils. "Talk to me." "I'm okay," he managed. "Door. Someone." He pressed a palm to his temple. They knew where the latch was. Axel stood rigid at the window, inhaling the storm, then turned toward the hall and let out a sound that wasn't a bark or a howl. It was a direction. He bolted. Kyle grabbed his parka, the small med kit, a spare radio, and the flashlight. Grace moved to follow, but he shook his head. "You're with Jonah. Call Chief Hall. Lock the doors. Don't open for anyone but me." Grace's eyes flashed. "Bring her home." "Count on it." He was out the back door into a world narrowed to white and motion. The wind knifed the breath right out of his lungs. Axel's shape became his compass. Dark, sure, never more than a few feet ahead, always checking back with a flick of the ear, a glance over the shoulder, the check-in of a partner trained to move as one. They cut through the alley, across the lot, up into the scrub where the ridge began. The town fell away. The storm became the only geography. Axel chose the line of least resistance without losing speed, tacking into the gusts the way a boat noses a current. Kyle's radio crackled. Fragments of Chief Hall's voice, the word Bolo, a street name swallowed by static. He pressed on. He trusted Axel, a dark mass resolved through the snow. The long face of the abandoned cold storage warehouse on the edge of Ravenshade, a twin in smaller bones to the place Rayburn had described. The fence had sagged years ago. The loading dock doors were chained, then not. One had been cut and re-looped to look closed. Axel reached the dock and stopped, head lifting, nostrils flaring. He pivoted left, down the length of the building, to a service door where the drift piled unevenly. Kyle's light caught a flash of color there, half buried. A glove, pink with a thin silver stripe. Lilies. He dropped to one knee, breath searing his throat. The glove was warm enough that it hadn't frozen solid. Minutes old. He slid it into his pocket like evidence and promised both. "Good boy," he said, the words a thread that tethered him back to steadiness. "Show me." Axel angled his body to the seam where the door met the frame. He nosed the bottom corner, then backed up, eyes on Kyle. The lock had been shimmed. Kyle wedged his shoulder into the metal and pushed. It gave an inch, then two. Cold air spilled into colder. Inside, the warehouse felt like the inside of a held breath. Racks loomed in rows, dusty, silent. Snow feathered in under the door and made miniature dunes on the concrete. Axel's paws ticked on the floor, then quieted when he found the carpet runner someone had laid to dampen sound. He followed it, stopping at a corner where the runner ended abruptly. Kyle's light found a sneaker print in the dust. Small, the tread shallow, a star scratched into the heel with a pen. Lilies. Beside it, a smear where a knee had slid, then a scuffed line leading toward the wall. "Crawl space," Kyle said, seeing it as she must have. The gap between pallet racks, the low panel lifted by small hands, the duct opening left unbolted. She'd been clever. She'd made choices. Pride and fear rose together in him like heat. Axel dipped his head and sniffed the gap. He didn't try to force it. He looked to Kyle again, waiting for the go. "Easy," Kyle said. "We do this right." He raised the radio, found a pocket of reception, and spoke low and clear. "Bennett to Hall, at the old freezer warehouse off Mill. Entry cut. I have Lily's glove, fresh sign. Possible crawl space route. Request units to perimeter. Quiet approach. Storm's masking sound." The answer came fractured, but intelligible. "Copy. Units en route. 10 out." 10 minutes in this cold was an hour anywhere else. Kyle turned back to Axel. The dog's focus had sharpened to a point. You could feel it in the way the room felt contained by his attention. "Find her," Kyle whispered. Axel slid into the dark like he'd been born to it. A low hum started in his chest. The guide sound handlers teach for close work. Kyle followed, keeping one hand on the rack to orient himself, the other on the light, the beam held low to cut glare. The storm outside raged on, a camouflage of noise and motion. Inside, clues lay where a brave kid had left them on purpose. A second glove snagged under a pipe, a hair tie curled like a small fossil near a vent, a streak in dust where she'd crawled and doubled back to throw off anyone who wasn't listening. She hadn't been carried the whole way. She'd gotten free long enough to make choices, to leave messages. "Hang on," Kyle said into the quiet, not sure whether he meant it for Lily, for Grace, or for himself. Maybe all three. Axel stopped at a junction where the crawl space narrowed and the ducts opened into a maintenance corridor. He put a paw on the concrete, then looked up at Kyle and, just once, let the smallest howl thread the dark. Not panic, direction, a map in a single note. Kyle squeezed the radio again. "I've got a line," he said. "We're moving." Outside, the blizzard threw itself at the walls. Inside, a branded dog and a cop with too many regrets traced a path a child had carved through fear with grit and quick thinking. The warehouse held its breath, waiting to see which door would open first, the one that let the storm in, or the one that let Lily out. The maintenance corridor breathed its own cold, a thin metallic draft sliding along the floor. Axel's hum steadied, guiding Kyle past a ladder, under a low pipe to a door with paint scabbed away at the handle. The storm's roar softened to a distant hush in here, like the building itself was listening. "Easy," Kyle whispered. Axel angled his body and waited. Kyle tested the knob, unlocked, he pressed, and the door sighed open onto an exterior catwalk that bridged the warehouse to an older logistics yard beyond the fence line. Trailers backed tight, floodlights dead, snow pasted in wind-shaped patterns across everything. The catwalk rail rattled once in the gale, then went still. Axel didn't flinch. He checked the air, then moved. They crossed to a stairwell and dropped to ground level, boots and paws landing soft in the drift. Axel cut left along the lee side of a row of trailers and paused at a door patched with mismatched rivets. A padlock hung there, snapped and rehooked to look intact. Kyle lifted it off, set it in his pocket, and eased the door. Inside was a dim, boxy room that smelled like cold metal and bleach. A battery lantern sat on a crate, its switch taped halfway up to keep the glow low. The light touched the first cage, then the next, then the next. They were clean. That was almost worse. Stainless panels, water fixtures, tags with numbers instead of names. No animals inside now, thank God, but fur caught in a hinge here, a chewed strap there, told the story without shouting it. On the far wall, a corkboard with pins and twine mapped routes between states, dots at truck stops and rural lots, names of shell companies printed in tidy fonts. In the corner, a laptop blinked on a portable inverter, screen dark, lid warm to the touch. Kyle felt his jaw set the way it does when the last piece clicks. "You were bringing me here," he said to Axel, not really expecting an answer. Axel moved straight past the cages to a locked interior door. He sat, looked up at Kyle, then down again at the latch. A simple bolt, engaged from the outside. Kyle slid it back. The door opened on a small storage bay. Lily sat on an upturned milk crate, blanket around her shoulders, cheeks pink from the cold but eyes clear. She'd found a heavy wrench and set it beside her like a sentry. When the door opened, she breathed once, fast, then straightened. "Hey," Kyle said, voice low, the word a steadying beam. "Hey," she echoed, and the corner of her mouth twitched like, "You're late." Axel nosed into her knee, pressing and then holding still so she could wrap both arms around his neck. She didn't cry. She squeezed twice, hard, then stood. "I knew you'd hear me," she told him. No exclamation, just certainty. Kyle knelt to her level. "You did good," he said. "You did everything right." "I left things along the way," she said, "like in the movie where the girl uses washers to mark her trail." "I found them," he said. "Every one." Her gaze flicked past him to the larger room. The cages, the map, the laptop. "Is this where they—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. "It's where they plan things they don't want people to see," Kyle said. "And we're going to make sure people see them." He keyed the radio. "Bennett to Hall. I have Lily. Repeat, I have Lily. We're in a trailer bay beyond the old freezer yard. South line. There's a logistics room full of cages and records. We need units and warrants. Quiet perimeter. No sirens." Static. Then the chief's voice, tight and traveling. "Copy. EMS staging 2 blocks out. Units converging. I want your exact door." Kyle gave it. He pivoted to the laptop, hit the spacebar, and the login screen cleared to a desktop. Someone had left it open. Spreadsheet icons. GPS software with multiple device tracks paused mid-draw. A thumb drive sat in the USB port, cheap and blue, taped with a strip labeled BR17. Kyle slid the tape off and looked at Axel. "Bravo 17, he said. Axel's ears tipped. Recognition, slight and steady. He clicked the GPS app. Routes snaked across the region. Colorado into Wyoming into Nebraska. Each line a record of miles stolen in plain sight. One route pulsed faintly. Keller's pickup, tagged by a hidden AirTag Axel's old collar had carried from the federal days. Whoever had set it had known they might need a breadcrumb you couldn't scrub. "Grace put a tracker on Axel's new collar," Lily said, catching his thought and vaulting it. "But this is older. It was his." Kyle mapped timestamps to places he recognized. Keller's truck had parked behind the clinic twice, lingered near the school once, idled at the town limits. The same device had stopped at the cold storage site from Rayburn's report 6 months earlier. Data stamped itself in neat rows that didn't care about anyone's story, only distance and time. He slid the thumb drive free, tucked it into a pocket-sized evidence bag. He photographed the screen with his phone, multiple angles, time visible, a hand for scale. He did the same to the cages, the routes, the padlock he'd pocketed. Every image was a nail you could hang a warrant on. Axel stayed planted between Lily and the door, one eye on the hall, one on them. He glanced to the side once, ears flicking, footsteps in the bigger yard. Not close. Not yet. "Move now," Kyle said. "We take her out the way we came. We leave this room as we found it, minus the drive." He shrugged his parka around Lily and cinched it at her waist. She stuck her hands into the sleeves and found the glove in one pocket. She closed her fingers over it and nodded like, "I'm keeping this." They retraced the route. Interior door, corridor, catwalk stairs. Axel ranging a half step ahead, then back, calibrating to Lily's shorter stride. The storm still worked in their favor, swallowing noise, smudging edges. At the catwalk door, Kyle paused, checked the yard. Snow raked across the trailers in long sheets. Headlights out on the road ghosted by and were gone. No shapes moving where they shouldn't. They slipped inside the warehouse and followed the carpet runner to the maintenance corridor. Lily ducked into the crawl space first, the same way she'd done it alone, but now with a hand on her shoulder, a quiet, "You're good, keep going." Axel took the tighter sections in a practiced pour of motion, then waited on the far side, pupil dark in the flashlight's penumbra, as patient as a lifeguard. At the service door, they stopped again. Kyle eased it an inch and looked. Blue strobes pulsed low and distant through the storm. No sirens, just coded light. Units had formed a perimeter without announcing it, Good. He keyed the radio. On your 9, he said. 2 out. Copy, came back. We have eyes on your door. They stepped into the storm's throat and made the short push to the alley side of the clinic, where Chief Hall herself stood in a snow-spattered parka, 3 officers fanned across the lot, and an EMT team hunched over warm packs and blankets. Lily walked straight to the chief like a kid who'd practiced her line. I did what my mom says, she said, clear and calm. I breathed slow, I looked for exits, I left markers. Chief Hall crouched, eye level. You did all of that, she answered. And you gave us exactly what we needed. Grace broke from the EMTs and gathered Lily in, not too tight, just enough to tell the body it could stand down. The 3 of them, mother, daughter, dog, stood in a small triangle of heat and relief. Axel pressed his head briefly to Grace's hip, then lifted his gaze to the yard, already working the next angle. Kyle handed the evidence bag to the chief. Thumb drive labeled BR-17. GPS logs on the laptop. Routes, devices, the works. We lock the yard down under exigent circumstances. Then we get our paperwork. That board is interstate. Hall weighed the bag. This just went federal, she said. It already was, Kyle replied. We just turned the lights back on. EMTs checked Lily's vitals. She answered their easy questions and gripped Axel's collar lightly like an anchor. Grace kissed the top of her head, lingered, let go. The storm hissed against the clinic's eaves. In the near distance, tires crunched slow as additional units arrived and nested into the perimeter. Kyle stepped back into the logistics room with 2 officers and a portable printer from a patrol bag. Photos, notes, timestamps rolling into a tidy stack. They cataloged cages by number, filmed the board, bagged ledgers, powered the laptop down, and tagged it. No dramatics, no raised voices, just the quiet work of turning a secret into evidence. When he returned to the door, Axel was watching him, tail low and steady, eyes bright. Kyle knelt so they were even. You didn't just survive, he said, hand on the dog's shoulder. You led us home. Axel breathed out in a way that sounded like a word he'd almost learned. Grace approached, Lily at her side, cheeks pink again but steady. We named the fund after him, Grace said, almost to herself, testing the future aloud. Training rescue dogs for snow deployments. We'll show people what second chances do. Lily nodded, solemn as a judge. Echo Fund, she said, then corrected herself with a small smile. Axel Fund. Kyle stood, snow webbing his shoulders, the cold no longer sharp. He looked across the yard, the cages, the map, the laptop now sealed, and felt the town tilt a degree toward daylight. Keller had built a shadow network that crossed state lines and counted on winter to keep it quiet. Axel had walked through that winter and left a path someone could follow. Get some rest, Chief Hall told them, eyes already on the arriving task force liaison. Tomorrow we do this loud. Tomorrow, Kyle said. Axel leaned into his leg the way he had on the first night. A press that meant, I'm here. The storm carried on. But the room behind them was lit now. Warm pools of light on metal bars and maps and the small space where a kid had waited without giving in. And in that glow, the shape of the next move stood up, clear and inevitable. Morning broke pale and forgiving, the storm spent, the town stitched back together with plow lines and the careful routines of people who knew how to start again. The logistics yard stood under a clean blue sky that made last night feel like a story you'd tell softly, so it didn't wake the dark up again. Tape fluttered at the perimeter. Evidence tags winked like small flags. A pair of federal SUVs idled near the fence, their antennas cutting neat angles into the cold. Chief Hall stood with a tablet and a styrofoam cup that steamed like a signal. Beside her, a task force liaison with calm eyes read off warrants as they cleared the next door and the next. Kyle moved through the rooms with them, shoulder to shoulder with officers he trusted. Every step a quiet conversion, from suspicion to proof, from rumor to record. The thumb drive labeled BR-17 turned out to be a key, not a treasure chest, an index pointing to cloud accounts, burner phones, purchase orders filtered through shell companies, with names so boring they were meant to be invisible. The GPS logs on the laptop threaded those names to places. Winter lot behind a prairie motel, gravel turnout beside a feed depot, a shuttered warehouse 3 counties over. The map on the corkboard wasn't art. It was a confession. "Serve it," the liaison said, and warrants jumped state lines with a single call. The network Keller had built for years began to dissolve in hours. Quiet pickups in parking lots. Interviews that opened because one piece of paper finally matched another. A courier who'd been waiting for someone to ask the right question in the right tone. Keller, for his part, didn't come back to the clinic. By noon, a county deputy spotted his pickup nosing south on a frontage road, the bed tarped, chains neatly coiled as ever. When the lights came on behind him, he didn't run. He slipped onto a farm lane and rolled to a stop under a line of cottonwoods, as if he'd planned to step out for air. He had a story ready about errands and the weather and misunderstanding. It didn't matter. The affidavit in the deputy's hand had teeth. The cuffs clicked, not loud, not showy. You could miss the sound if you weren't listening for endings. They brought him to Ravenshade without parade. He stared past the station's brick at the mountains, as if the range could tell him where his luck had gone. Inside, he asked for a lawyer. Outside, the liaison fielded another call. 2 more sites secured, a third still being processed. No one used the word ring. They didn't need to. The shape was clear. By afternoon, the yard felt less like a crime scene and more like a place that belonged to the weather again. Grace came by with Lily and a thermos of soup, left it with the officers, and squeezed Kyle's arm before heading to the clinic. Axel moved between them and the tape with the same steady attention he'd shown all week, registering faces, cataloging sounds, filing it all away as if he might be asked to recall it later. When Noah Rayburn arrived, long drive, no calls, just a man who had packed a truth he'd been carrying and brought it to the right door. Axel saw him first. He rose, shoulders loosening, tail a slow metronome. Rayburn stopped 3 paces away, one hand gripping the back of a chair, as if holding steady was its own oath. "Hey, partner," he said, and there was a tremor in the single word that didn't ask for permission. Axel stepped in, pressed his head to Rayburn's thigh, and breathed out. Not a whine, not a bark. Recognition, pure and simple. They didn't rush the moment. No one needed to. The town had time again. Inside the station, the federal liaison briefed Chief Hall and Kyle on what the drive had cracked open. 6 months ago, the liaison said, tapping a redacted report on the table. This went dark. Evidence logs lost in the transfer. Cameras offline during power event. Your dog carried the missing thread back through a blizzard and right to our doorstep. He angled his head toward the window, where Axel lay with Lily's hand tucked into his ruff. We reopen. We don't just sweep, we dig. Good, Chief Hall said. Simple, not performative. Do it right. Keller's booking was quiet, paperwork squared, calls logged. He kept his eyes forward. When he finally looked up, it was at Kyle. You don't know what you stepped into, he said, voice flat, an old bluff trying to find a table. Kyle didn't rise. We've been in it all along, he said. You just got used to the lights being off. The town met in the square at dusk, not because someone planned a rally, but because a cold day gave way to a soft evening, and people needed to see one another standing. The plows had pushed snow into clean banks. Strings of winter lights bridged the street, warm and ordinary in a way that felt like medicine. The diner ladled hot chocolate. Someone tuned a guitar and didn't play it. The air held a hum that wasn't fear, more a shared exhale. Lily stood at a small portable mic the fire department rolled out for holiday announcements. Her hair was braided, her mitten dangled from a string. She took a breath and looked at Axel. He sat like he'd trained for this, head high, ears relaxed, one paw slightly forward the way good posture sometimes is. "I made something," she said, and held up a metal cut from hammered tin, ribbon borrowed from a box of old decorations. In the center, she'd etched a simple shape, two lines crossing like paths meeting. She stepped forward and looped it over Axel's neck. He blinked, leaned, and let it rest against his chest with the gravitas only dogs can give to human gestures. Grace came next, a sheet of paper in her hand, her voice steady, no notes needed. "We're starting a fund," she said. "It will train rescue dogs for snow deployments, help agencies without budgets for winter work, and sponsor veterinary care for retired K9S. It's named for the dog who brought us here, and for what he first was to us. An echo in the snow we learned to follow. The Echo Fund." The name settled over the crowd like a good fit. You could hear people trying it out under their breath. Echo, smiling at the sound. Kyle glanced at Lily. Echo, and saw the private joke land in her eyes too. A story's circle closing. Noah Rayburn stepped up then, keeping it short. Because some debts aren't repaid with speeches. "Axel was missing," he said, voice low. But this town didn't let him stay lost. He looked at Kyle. "Sometimes you need a place to catch a thread again." When it was Kyle's turn, he didn't take the mic. He stood a step off, hands in his coat pockets, and found words the way he used to find exits in the dark. "We all want to believe we came here to be safe," he said, projecting only as far as the first row and trusting the rest to carry. "But safety isn't the same as quiet. You showed me that. You reminded me what it looks like when people bring out blankets and testimony and hot soup and say we're going to do this together." He looked at the mountains, purple now, the sky in bands. Denver felt far and close at once. The case that only taught him how to leave. The echo that taught him how to stay. He pictured the empty shelves in his rental, the boxes he hadn't unpacked in case this wasn't permanent. "I'm staying," he said softly to Grace, to Lily, to Axel, to himself. "If you'll have me." Grace didn't answer with words. She slid her arm through his and leaned, light as a nod. Lily grinned without breaking her solemn 9-year-old composure. Axel bumped Kyle's knee, a small nudge that functioned like a signature on a line. Around them, the square warmed in degrees you couldn't measure with a thermometer. Neighbors introducing themselves like they hadn't already known each other for years. A council member taking notes about crosswalk lights near the school. The diner promising to host the Echo Fund's first bake sale, even though nobody bakes like they used to, and it would probably be store-bought pies. None of it was grand. All of it mattered. When the lights came on, the ones strung across the street, the ones along the eaves, the ones in the station windows where paperwork still stacked and phones still rang. Kyle felt the town's pulse steady under his feet. Justice didn't come with a trumpet blast. It arrived like this, catalogued, witnessed, carried through the cold by hands and paws and patience. Later, when the square thinned and the wind found its voice again, Kyle walked Axel down Main, past the diner and the hardware store and the barber shop with the spinning pole that looked wrong under snow. Their steps matched without thinking. The night was clear enough to show the first stars. "You brought us here," Kyle said. "You brought me back." Axel looked up, eyes bright, and then forward again, as if to say the next turn was coming, and he had it. The metal ticked softly against his chest, a small sound carried through winter, proof that sometimes the ones we save do the saving right back. The first quiet morning after everything, Ravenshade felt rinsed. Sun on frost, sidewalks scraped clean, the mountains wearing a calm blue that made you breathe deeper without trying. I walked Axel to the station early, habit, maybe, or just the need to put my boots where the week had happened and say, "We're still here." His metal tapped his chest with each step, a soft metronome. Steam curled from the diner's vents, bacon and coffee riding the air like a good rumor. Inside my office, the heat rattled once, then steadied. Files lay in careful stacks, the kind you make when you mean to finish, not hide. Axel circled twice and dropped by my chair, chin on his paws, eyes half closed. One ear tilted toward the door, the way a soldier keeps a hand on a map long after the battle's done. Scars faded to pale threads along his shoulder. He'd earned every one. He wore them like lines on a road. I should have felt empty. Cases closed, statements given. The part of me that feeds on the chase suddenly without something to chase. But it wasn't emptiness. It was space. Like a room you finally cleared and could now decide what to put back. I thought of Denver the way you think of a street you don't drive anymore. Not with anger, not even with regret. Just with a nod that says, "I learned." I thought of the family I couldn't help back then, and I set their faces beside last night's square, where a kid with a braid and mittens handed out courage like it was hot chocolate. Different stories. Same need. Somebody to stay when the lights flicker. Grace knocked once on the doorframe and slid in with 2 coffees, Lily wearing a backpack nearly as big as her. School would start late because the plows were still finishing the far roads. They set the cups down, both hands still warm from holding them. "You look rested," Grace said, and left the rest of the sentence to the steam. "I slept," I said. "Didn't think I would. Then I did." Lily crouched and ran a palm over Axel's chest, fingertips catching the edge of the tin metal. "Big day today," she said. "Mom talks to the bank. I get to pick a logo in art. Axel gets a nap." "A full schedule," I said. She grinned, quiet and satisfied, the grin of a person who had seen her plan work and didn't need to explain it to anyone. When they left, the office thinned to the kind of silence I used to dread, room for memories to crowd in, for doubt to take a seat and start writing its own reports. But nothing crowded. Doubt stayed outside. I opened a notebook, wrote the date in the corner, January, thin light sliding across the page, and started a list that wasn't about evidence or interviews. It was about the next right thing. Finish training hours for winter search certification. Help Grace draft Echo Fund charter. Call Rayburn. Ask what equipment small departments actually need, not what brochures say. Talk to the chief about a town hall on legitimate K-9 programs. No drama, just daylight. Unpack the last box in my rental. Small lines, big shift. Axel huffed once, a soft sound that said, "I agree." He rolled onto one hip, the way dogs do when they've decided the perimeter is good, and the next 10 minutes belong to rest. Sun reached the floor by his paws, turned them gold. Around 10, Chief Hall stuck her head in. No ceremony, just the chief who'd held the line and let us do what needed doing. "You're staying," she said, like it wasn't a question. "I'm staying," I answered. "Good," she said. "There's a citizen meeting Thursday. Folks want to hear from the person who saw the inside of the yard and kept his head. I'll be there, I said. Keep it plain. Give them the real shape. That's all they want, she said. That, and to see the dog. He charges 2 treats per handshake, I said. She almost smiled. We'll bill the county. After she left, I rewound the last week one more time. Not for holes, not to scold myself like I used to, but to notice the quiet things that made the loud thing possible. Lily's slow breath at the window. Grace's steady hands on a chip the world didn't want read. Jonah's quick call, then his stubbornness about staying to mop up the messy middle. Rayburn's patch, the way it carried scent and memory across distance. Axel, choosing doorways and routes and people with a certainty I could borrow when mine ran thin. I realized something I should have realized years ago. Sometimes the ones we save end up saving us. It isn't sentimental, it's practical. Rescue runs both directions, or it doesn't run at all. That's the message I gave the town that night at the community center, standing at a scuffed podium while folding chairs creaked their familiar song. No slides, no fancy words. Just the story, told straight. A branded dog who refused to be defined by a mark. A kid who remembered to leave sign. A town that made light with what it had. Flashlights, coffee, witness, stubbornness. I asked them to do a few simple things that add up. Support legitimate K-9 programs. Ask for transparency. If a department can't tell you where its dogs come from, keep asking. Adopt rescue animals through organizations that vet, train, and follow up. Second chances need structure to stick. Share what you learn, not gossip, experience, especially with kids. They listen. They prove it when it counts. Look, I said, hands on the podium like a fence you lean on to talk across. None of this is about making a town perfect. It's about making a town present. We show up. We keep notes. We ask for receipts. We bring soup. We stay when the weather goes bad. Afterward, people came up one by one, the way they do when they're weighing their own stories against the one they just heard. A rancher asked how to mark stock trailers better. A teacher asked for a list of questions kids could practice in drills without scaring them. The diner offered a bulletin board corner for Echo Fund envelopes. A quiet man with a mechanic's hands said he knew a supplier who could get winter booties for dogs at cost. Small things. Everything. When I finally stepped outside, the night had gone clear and brittle. Stars shot across the sky like pins in a map. Grace and Lily waited by the truck, cheeks pink, breath white. Axel hopped into the back, settled like he owned the upholstery now. He did. Home, Grace said. Home, I answered. On the drive, Main Street's windows showed their late-hour lives. Dishwashers flashing in the diner, a lamp on in the barber's. A kid rolling up a rug at the yoga place. The station's front room warm with a desk lamp and the hum of a printer doing boring, necessary work. The kind that holds the world together. Back at the house, I set my last box on the kitchen counter, sliced the tape and pulled out the picture the movers had wrapped twice. My first badge photo. Too much hair. Too much certainty. I tucked it into a drawer with a nod and pinned a new thing on the fridge. Lily's metal drawing, the crossed paths. Under it, I wrote a number in thick pen, Echo Fund P.O. Box, and a line I meant for anyone who might pause at my door and wonder what we'd learned. We are still listening. We are still here. If you're hearing this and it touches something you've been carrying, share it. Like the story. Follow the updates. Tell someone what it stirred up in you, not for me. For the next Axel who needs a path through a storm. And for the next town that thinks quiet is the same as safe and finds out it isn't. We'll meet you at the door with light and a leash and the promise that this time we go together.